we'll send this out to you again after the event. Make sure that you are muted. You're welcome to have your video on if you want. We do have a formal presentation at the beginning, and then we'll hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session where you'll have an opportunity to ask our panelists or study abroad advisors any questions. If any questions do come up throughout the presentation, you are welcome to put them in the chat at the moment so you don't forget them later on. But we'll be addressing those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. So thank you everybody for being here. My name is Christy Blue. I am a study abroad advisor at USD in the International Center. The International Center is comprised of helping students who are hoping to go study abroad, either for a semester or a short-term period of time. I know many of our attendees today are going abroad and planning to go abroad this spring 2021, but we may have some students here who are just beginning the process as well. So hopefully this can give you some tools and things to think about as you're preparing for your experience abroad. I'll just have my two other study abroad advisors say a quick hello. We have Brittany Williams and Chelsea Weaver, if you want to just say hi.
Hi everyone, study abroad advisor for a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, among others in Europe.
Hi everybody, I'm Chelsea, another study abroad advisor for many countries.
Thank you so much. And we'll introduce our panelists in just a minute. I just want to give everyone a quick overview of what this event is. For those participants today who deferred their study abroad experience from the fall 2020 semester to the spring 2021 semester, we did host an event very similar to this in a previous term. From a different perspective, we had different on-campus resources directors from different on-campus resources come in and speak to culture and identity and their experiences abroad. Today, we're hoping to complement that same sort of event that we had with our student perspective. So USD students who are just like you, who have been abroad and are hoping to share some information about their experiences and how their identity translated into the new culture while they were abroad. So we're gonna go through, and the whole idea is that we do have our pre-departure meetings. Some of you have been to yours already, some have not, and they're coming up soon. Those are really great events for prepping you on a lot of the logistics and policies of studying abroad. But the idea behind this event is that we're bringing a whole new element of your preparation from a very personal and a cultural perspective. And so we really wanted to bring in that extra dimension to better prepare students for your day-to-day life and interactions while you're there, and how your life here in the US is going to be, you know, a little bit different, and what that might look like when you're in a new culture and you're faced with all those uncertainties, especially the culture shock when you first get there. So what we're gonna do is we have 4 wonderful panelists, our USD Study Abroad alums. I'm gonna have them go through and introduce themselves, and panelists, you can say your name, your major, and where and when you studied abroad. And we'll start with Faiza.
Hi everyone, my name is Faiza. I'm a marketing major with a visual arts minor, and I studied abroad in Oxford, England in fall 2019.
Morgan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I graduated in May 2020 and I majored in behavioral neuroscience and French, and I studied abroad in Aix-en-Provence, France in spring 2020. Or no, 2019. Yeah.
And Kirsten?
Hi everyone, my name is Kirsten. I'm a double major in business, economics, and finance, and I did my study abroad program in Prague, and that was last fall, so fall of 2019.
And Natalie.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie. I'm studying international relations in Spanish, and I studied abroad last spring in Madrid, Spain.
Perfect, thank you so much. So how this is going to work, I have some prepared questions that I'm going to ask each of our panelists, and I will say you by name and have you respond. We'll go through the list of questions, and then at the end, we'll have a question and answer. So for all our participants, again, please have questions ready and available. You can put them in the chat as you think of them, and then we'll address any questions at the end. But thank you, panelists. We're looking forward to hearing about your experiences abroad. So for the first question, I'm gonna start with Kirsten and have you address this first. But often when you're abroad, you know, you're now in a new culture and people are trying to get to know you and where you're from. That can be a very confusing question sometimes, you know, especially in the context of, you know, being international. You know, if you're at USD, you could say you're a USD student or that you're from your hometown. But now when you're international, maybe what are they asking of you in where are you from? So when someone asks you when you're abroad, where are you from? How do you respond to that question?
Yeah, so there were a lot of instances where I was asked where I was from, but it was also really funny because I didn't know this about Prague when I first went, but apparently they have a really big Vietnamese minority race in the country. So sometimes they would assume me to be another Vietnamese Czech person, which is really funny. And then they hear me start speaking and then they ask me, oh, where are you from? And it's really awkward because you can tell they're asking me not, because I just look different. So I say America, but then they're like, but like where? So it I kind of narrow the scope and I just say, I'm from California and then from San Francisco. And then sometimes it gets to a really awkward position where they keep insisting, asking me where I'm from because I don't look like the typical American. So I think they're confusing what my nationality is versus what my ethnicity is, because ethnically I am Chinese. Like my family immigrated from China, but I was born and raised in San Francisco. So it's a little it's a tedious line to a balance to answer the question. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And Natalie, how would you respond in that situation, or how did you respond?
Yeah, that's actually a question that I get a lot, even in San Diego and even in the States, just because I do have a little accent. And so even today I had a lab and I had a classmate ask me, where are you from? And it's like, we've been in class together this whole semester. But it's fine, I've gotten used to it. And I normally say I'm from the UK, but I grew up in the States. And being in Spain, it kind of is interesting because you can kind of choose which identity and which nationality you identify with more. So for me, sometimes if I'm trying to kind of relate to the person who's asking me and they're a European person, I might say, oh, I'm English, because they might kind of find more in common with me that way. So in that way, it's kind of like an interesting dynamic, but I definitely have the American perspective because I've grown up in Seattle in the States. So I also say that sometimes when I'm trying to explain why I'm here and why I'm why I would be studying abroad and who I'm studying abroad with, which is USD, obviously. So yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting question, and you can almost see it as an opportunity to talk about your roots and kind of where you identify with and where you're from and where you have family around the world. So I think it might seem tedious, but it's also a good opportunity, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. In our next question, I'll start with Morgan. Is going abroad what you expected it to be?
I honestly, I think for France it was and it wasn't, because you're kind of expecting wine and cheese everywhere and fine dining everywhere and all that stuff, but it's definitely not that, especially as a student. And I think something that definitely I had to kind of come to terms with was that I was at a university with a lot of other American students, which was really great because you found people that spoke your own language and could understand, what you were trying to say. But I also still craved the complete immersion at a French-speaking university. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why now I'm in Quebec City, Canada, because I'm at a French-speaking university and my courses are in French, and I also work in a lab. So the lab is like, you know, franglais, like a mix of, you know, depending on who I'm talking to. But it definitely, yeah, it definitely was, you know, like some of it was the same of like really great food and like, you know, good like classes and stuff. But I think some of it was, I kind of wished for almost a little bit more immersion, but I still learned a lot. Like you don't need complete total immersion all the time to still learn a language. And that's like the main takeaway, is that your brain does need breaks. You know, even now I'm like, I talk to my mom, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I get to talk to somebody in English today. You know, like it's just, yeah, it's great.
And then as a follow-up question to that, Morgan, how did you deal with the uncertainty? How would you recommend planning for that uncertainty abroad?
I would try your best to plan for everything. I know that it's really hard, but that's kind of like what I did. Especially, I had an issue with my visa when I was in France, which I resolved, but I had another issue when I actually came to Canada because my last name is McLaughlin, and on my passport, it's MC space LAU, rest of my last name. And on my other documents, there wasn't a space. And they're like, is this you? And I'm just like, so plan for everything, but sometimes you cannot plan for everything, because I did not realize that there's a space in my last name on my passport until I had arrived at the border to apply for my study permit. So do your best. Try to bring everything with you that you need. Have a backup plan. And no matter what, like, as long as you have your health and safety, like, it's gonna be okay. Like, even if it ends up like, you know, you're allowed to go for a few weeks and, you know, maybe COVID gets worse and you have to come back, like, be prepared for anything and being able to, you know, essentially adapt to anything, and it'll be okay either way. So.
Thank you, Morgan. And then Kirsten, I'd like to, or sorry, actually Natalie, apologize. Natalie, I'd like to address the same question to you. When you went abroad, is it what you expected it to be?
It wasn't. It definitely wasn't. And a big part of that is because COVID happened in the middle of my semester abroad. So it kind of came to Europe in March, like middle of March. So I ended up having to come home early from studying abroad. And yeah, that was definitely not what I expected. And I definitely felt a little like bummed about it because I was really enjoying my time abroad. But I think it's important to remember that it's okay to have that kind of reaction, and it's okay to be upset about it. When something that like you were expecting to go one way goes a different way, like it's the normal reaction to kind of feel a little off about it and kind of feel upset. So I think that's like something that I had to kind of grapple with, and that I thought about a lot, like in my process of coming home. But I can talk a little bit about like how it actually happened. Is that we just progressively got more news about the virus, and with my homestay family, like every night we would watch the news on TV, like while we ate dinner. And so we heard about it in China, and we thought, that's fine, like it's in China, it's not going to come to Europe. And then school ended up being cancelled for 2 weeks, so it moved online for 2 weeks. And so I had a flight to England booked for that weekend just to go visit my aunt. And I thought, oh, I'll just stay in England for 2 weeks and kind of like hold tight and wait this out, because that's what we all thought, is that it was just going to end in 2 weeks and like everything was going to go back to normal. And then obviously that didn't happen. And so I ended up like having to call my mom like in the middle of the night because of the time difference and working out flights and things. So it was definitely kind of a scramble, and just like none of us were expecting it to happen. But in the end, I actually feel like okay about what happened. And I think just having that like normal reaction of being upset and like knowing that that's okay is really important. And then I did a lot of reflection when I came home and just like wrote down everything, all my thoughts, all my memories, and trying to just remember the good parts, I guess. Just trying to remember like how amazing it was and be thankful for the time that I did have. And I still like talk to the family a lot, and I still like look back through my photos of that time and make a plan to go back in the future sometime. So yeah, I think in the end, it worked out okay. And then for you guys, like for the people who are going abroad next semester, I would say that you actually have the advantage of knowing that the virus exists and that the pandemic is like happening already. So like, you know a little bit more about how to mitigate it and how to prepare for it a little better. And so I think having a couple backup plans in your head of like, if the virus comes to where I am, like how am I going to deal with that? And where am I going to live? If I'm sent home, like am I going to live with family or with friends in San Diego? Those are all good things to be thinking about. So I think, yeah, it's like a good advantage to have to know that like plans might change and just to be flexible with that.
Thank you for sharing, Natalie. In our next question, Natalie already covered some of it too, so I won't ask you again, but we'll start with Morgan. What is a difficult situation you encountered abroad related to your identities, and how did you handle it?
Well, I think for me, like a very, I guess, specific example was that I was in class, I was in an ethics class, and I was talking with the professor in front of the class, and we were just talking about how like basically the patriarchy exists and like sexism is happening, and maybe we shouldn't like, you know, basically have like women solve problems generally in society, and maybe we should hold men accountable more often for their actions. And the professor, you need to learn your place. And I was like, excuse me? So that was very, very direct, difficult situation about just my identity as being female. And then I eventually, you know, had to go to the school about it and resolve that issue. But I don't really know what happened with him because he's an older man with a history of sexism in general. So I don't really know what happened. But I think the best thing to do is if you have someone that is, you know, basically making sexist, racist, homophobic comments, is to contact your authority, like, you know, your school, anyone, like reach out versus keeping it in, because when you keep it in and fester it, it might all come out at once, which is obviously not an ideal situation, but trying to handle it as, you know, calmly as you can, I think is the best way to deal with comments like that. So yeah, that was how I handled it.
As a little follow-up to that, Morgan, you know, that story I think can easily be, you know, have happened here in the US. So can you talk a little bit about the cultural element of having an experience in a different country, and were there other, you know, barriers to navigating that situation? Were there other resources you needed to consider to go through that?
I think, I mean, the thing is too, what's really nice about being at IAU is everybody pretty much, like almost everyone like at the advisor level is bilingual. So I think that's a big advantage. And yeah, I would just, you know, I think the biggest thing too, like even like what I've noticed in Quebec City too, is like a lot of people do speak English, but sometimes there's different levels of English, and sometimes the comprehension is really good and sometimes it's not as good. But I would make sure that you're talking to somebody that, you know, really understands you, has a high level of English generally, or, you know, if you have another native language, like finding someone that speaks that language and explaining that situation to you, because that I feel like is the biggest thing. Like there's someone in our lab that his first language is Farsi and his second language is English. But even then, like, it's so much better when one of our other lab mates, Adham, talks with him in Farsi, because it's a lot easier for them to, you know, troubleshoot scientific, technical lab issues when it's in your native language.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. I appreciate it. And then Kirsten, will you also speak to this question? What was a difficult situation you encountered abroad related to your identity or identities, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so it definitely ties in with what I brought in earlier, where I just looked different and people just saw me as different. So they weren't as, I have like cases where they just treated me differently, especially like when I'm like with my friends who were white or Caucasian, like they were definitely more approachable to them and they were more willing to help them, versus when I walked to like a convenience store alone or just walking down the street, I would just get looks from people. But I definitely think traveling in groups definitely helps ease that social anxiety. And another thing is to also learn a little bit of the culture. So in the Czech Republic, they greet you greet people when you enter in their store. So you say Dobrý den, which is good day, or nashledanou, which is like goodbye when you leave. And just having those social cues like definitely helps ease some of those cultural differences. Because when I walked in the store and I greeted them with like the Czech greeting, they were more willing to approach me and be helpful. And I just think it just little efforts like that goes a long way, for sure.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Next, I'm going to ask Faiza to address our next question. What resources related to identity are most helpful for students while preparing to go abroad, or while they are abroad, or when they come back from being abroad? What resources did you find helpful, and what resources might you recommend to our students who are preparing to go abroad?
So I definitely think attending sessions like this, where you hear real life experiences, are super important just so you can prepare yourself for when you go abroad. I personally was in contact with someone who had gone to Oxford before I did. So she was kind of telling me a lot about what the culture was like there, what to expect, and that kind of stuff. So I went to like an international college, and it was a nice mix of people. I didn't actually know that at first, but it was kind of a fun little thing to walk into, and I can go into that more later too. But I also would definitely recommend you using the International Center website. We do have a Identities and Culture Abroad tab that is definitely a good way to explore. And these are all starting points, so you can really jump off to, different websites. You get to know more people through that. I think the person-to-person connection is super important, but know that you're not going to be prepared for everything. There's going to be things that you aren't going to expect to experience, but definitely using our website and talking to people is a great starting point.
And Morgan, did you want to share any resources in regards to identity?
I think, I did use the study abroad officers a lot and my mom. I think too, like keeping in touch with your family is very, very important when you're abroad, because WhatsApp is free with Wi-Fi, and you can FaceTime, you can call, you can text. That probably, honestly, I think my family was one of my biggest resources too, because they were always someone that I could talk to. My mom likes to call me, so it was nice. But yeah.
Great. And this is something we talk about in our pre-departure meetings a little bit too, making sure that you're utilizing, if you do have a third-party vendor that you're working with, or just the university abroad, this experience is certainly, based on the level of engagement that you have in immersing yourself. Morgan and Faiza for sharing a few of those. Now we will start with Natalie for our next question. How did your experience abroad help enrich or grow your own identities?
Yeah, so I was going to talk about like independence abroad. So for me, like for gender identity, for example, I identify as she, her, his. And this definitely relates to like my self-confidence. Definitely in Spain, just I would say the culture is a little bit less like politically correct than in the States. I'm pretty sure that most people would agree with that. Like they do have things like the Me Too movement, and I actually like attended a like women's rights march when I was in Spain, which was really cool, except for like the virus started right after that, so not the best. But definitely just like interacting with that different culture was kind of a shock to me, and especially like I don't really look Spanish, and so people can like tell if you're walking around the city that maybe you're not from there, and it might not be like how you look, but also just how you carry yourself, and like the language that you're speaking in. For example, like if I'm speaking on the phone in English, people can tell. So I don't know, just like in the beginning, I was kind of going through that adjustment of like not feeling like I fully fit into the culture and not feeling like super comfortable like walking around by myself, especially because I lived in a homestay like where I was the only student, and so I would like walk to school and back by myself, and like if I was coming back from a night out, that would be like by myself as well. So those things like they did make me nervous in the beginning, but I think kind of going through that has made me more independent, just because I've like had like those experiences. I've been in kind of like iffy situations and I've like come out fine. So yeah, just like self-confidence really like kind of like being abroad and like doing things by yourself, it forces you to be more independent. And you also have to be okay with like messing up. Like for me, I was really trying to work on my Spanish, and in order to get better at it, you just have to mess up a lot of times, and that's really like how you learn. So yeah, I would say like being abroad just helped me to become more independent and comfortable with my gender identity.
Thank you, Natalie. Faiza, would you like to address this question as well? How did your experience abroad help enrich or grow your own identities?
Okay, so I'm obviously, well, not obviously, but I'm Pakistani. I'm a very tiny Pakistani woman. And I was in Oxford with a bunch of students from all around the world, since it was an international college. Being in such a diverse environment made me really feel more comfortable in my identity. And they would ask questions, they'd be curious about like, oh, my culture and my background. And a lot of people would think that I was actually an Indian exchange student, which was really funny, but obviously I was American once they heard me speak. So everyone had like their own culture to contribute, and we all learned a lot from each other. But because they were kind of younger, they were like 18 years old, they were a little less mature with it. So when I would talk to them, some of them would say culturally insensitive things, and that I just had to be aware of. I think I sort of had to have a tougher skin about it, because it's not the way that they were sort of raised to be, to like, we learn to be more careful about this kind of stuff. We all go to a good university, we all are learning to be mindful of each other, but not everyone learns that way. It really depends on the different cultures and the kinds of things that they're grown into. So sometimes I would just be sitting there and they'd say something and I'd say, that isn't something that's typically okay to say in the US. And then we'd have an honest and genuine conversation about it, and people were willing to listen, which was really nice. And even if people don't change, inevitably it still is good to discuss it with them. Obviously, try not to be forceful about it, be kind, be understanding of all these different backgrounds. And when I came back, I felt more comfortable in who I am, because I've met so many people with such different walks of life. And I don't know, it just feels more empowering to be who I am as a small Pakistani woman with several other identities too that people learn about me. And it's just a really unique experience. If you harness it in the right way, you'll experience tremendous growth, and you can't let it hinder you from going on adventures or meeting new people, socializing and doing all the different kinds of activities. Because it was still England, it still felt like a storybook, and I was just another character in it, to put it like that.
Awesome. Thank you, Faiza. Now we have one more question, and I have Morgan and Kirsten ready to go on this one, but I'm actually going to ask each one of our panelists to address this question, because you've all been abroad, you all have amazing perspectives and tips and tricks to share for our attendees today. So we'll start with Kirsten. What advice or tips and tricks do you have for students as they prepare to travel abroad?
So definitely something that was touched upon, I forgot if it was Morgan or Natalie, but just try to be as prepared as possible. Like, there are some things you take for granted at home that aren't available abroad. So like, for example, like in Prague, they don't have dryers. So you have to hang dry all your clothes. So it's a lot of like big culture shock like that. Or like when you go to a grocery store, you're not going to see like your favorite brand of cereal on the shelves. Like they're going to have like the Czech or what the country substitute of that. So just be prepared for culture shock like that. I think another tip is to definitely do some research and get to know the culture a little bit more, so that you can just be a bit familiar, and it'll help you in the long run, because you are spending 3 or 4 months in this country. So it would just make your experience a little bit more well-rounded if you're able to connect with that culture a little bit more.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I'll add too, so advice, tips, and tricks, but also what is your number one takeaway from your study abroad experience? I'll circle back to you, Kirsten, so you have a moment to think about that as well. But I'll head off to Morgan, if you'd like to address tips, tricks, and your number one takeaway from studying abroad.
Yeah, so another tip is you do say bonjour or bonsoir when you enter a smaller shop, not like, I'm thinking of Metro, which is Canadian, but basically if you go to like a supermarket, like a big store, you don't need to say it. But if you're going to like a small little like candle shop or like cookie store or bakery, like bonjour, bonsoir, merci, au revoir, like all those go super long way, but especially saying hello to the person behind the counter when you walk in is a huge plus. And I would say to use public transportation as much as you can, because you can go a long way using very few dollars. I think a lot of schools you'll get a pass. I would use that. If you can, I don't know what it's going to be like this spring, but if farmers markets are available, that's some of the best food and the best cooking that you will do. And it's very reasonable. Maybe my host mom particularly didn't ever have Kleenex. So maybe just bring your own little packets of Kleenex, because in an emergency, I would use toilet paper. Pack light. You will not need 2 suitcases of stuff, I promise. After my initial semester, I traveled through Europe and I sent literally a giant suitcase worth home of stuff that I did not need, and I got by with my backpack worth of clothes. Yeah, those are my big, number one pro tip. If you can, whether it's at the beginning, the end, in the middle, take time to just travel to the place that you've always been to in Europe. If it's Poland, great. It's the closest you're going to be to Poland, in probably the next few years. So take the extra time, spend a little extra money to go to that place that you've always wanted to go to without having like school and books to worry about.
Thank you, Morgan. Natalie?
I would say take advantage of everything, like Morgan said, but also to like know yourself and know when you need to take time to just watch Netflix at home, or go eat like a American food, like a burger or something, like you really do want to like take advantage of the culture when you can and do as many things, because your time abroad is limited, but sometimes you need a night like for yourself. So don't be afraid to do that. Also, portable phone charger is really good. Make sure you get one of those just in case. Using the metro is another really good thing. And just know that you don't have to feel settled in right away. It takes time, and you might like meet the best friends of your life, but you might not meet them until like the last month. So just, it's not gonna like all click right when you arrive, it's gonna take it some time, but it'll be great no matter what. So yeah. And I think my biggest takeaway would probably just be that, like, I know that I want to spend more time abroad now that I've been for a semester. I know that it's like something in my future. So yeah.
Thank you. And Faiza?
I actually just want to build off what Natalie said about knowing yourself. I know a lot of people when they go abroad, they want to travel like everywhere. I didn't really want to, and it was because I also didn't have an airport right there. So I did not want to take the train into London and have to figure out flights and stuff. So I was really happy staying local and just visiting the parks over the weekend and going to museums and things like that. And they organized some trips for us, which was pretty helpful, but it was still like pretty close to Oxford. And definitely be open-minded. Not everything's going to be the way you want it to be, and you have to be willing to accept that. But like, you can't get mad if, say, you didn't want, like, I honestly once lost money when I was abroad because somebody told me they would exchange money for me, and I just lost it because they gave me fake money back. It was not a convenient experience, but and my sister was infuriated, but we just had to carry on with our trip. We couldn't let it ruin it, and we still made some amazing memories despite it. So focus on the positive, expect things that you do not want to, that you just are not going to know what's going to happen. So be willing to accept those things. Obviously do what you can to make it the best experience you can, but also know your limits. It's nothing everyone else hasn't already said, but really understand that if you don't want to be social, you don't have to be social. It's good to have a balance of what you're going to do and understand yourself in a new environment and know that you're going to come back different in ways that you didn't know you would. So it may be everything you expect, but then it could also be completely different. I also went abroad my freshman year, and I went to Paris over an intersession. And I was like, oh my God, Paris, I've been dreaming to go since I was 5. And I got horribly sick. And one other advisor, she had to like make sure I was okay. And then I was finally good on the last day. And I was walking around Paris and I was like, this is everything I want it to be, but it is completely different than like the feeling I thought it would be. And it didn't detract from the experience necessarily. It was just new. You just have to be open to that. So yeah.
Thank you, Faiza. And then Kirsten, just circling back around to you, if you wanted to share like a #1 takeaway from your study abroad experience, if you had anything.
Yeah, I think the #1 takeaway for me, that is, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. Not everything is going to be what you expect it to be. So you shouldn't go in with I mean, you could, but you shouldn't go in like with like closed-minded with expectations. Like, I think you just enjoy your experience a lot more if you're just open to new opportunities and to be able to take advantage of like being abroad away for a semester, because when are you ever going to have the chance to do so again?
Amazing. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Those were all of our questions that we had for you today. So what we're going to do next is we're going to open it up for Q&A for our attendees today. Keep in mind, I mean, make sure that, you know, this is all about identity and culture abroad. So make sure that you're respectful in the questions that you're asking of our panelists. You can either put your questions in the chat, or we can attempt an unmute yourself situation and see if that works all right with as many students. But honestly, think about what we want you to take away from all of this is some tangible ideas and thoughts and actions that you can do to prepare for your experience abroad. Start looking introspectively about who you are, what that means in the context of your identity and your culture here in the US. And then also thinking about like what that might look like for you and how you prepare for that when you're actually abroad. So hopefully hearing some of these personal perspectives from our study abroad returnees can just help you start that journey of reflection on yourself in preparation of going abroad. I'm going to hand this over to Chelsea Weaver, one of our other study abroad advisors, to do our Q&A. But thank you again so much, panelists. It was just amazing to hear everything that you had to say.
Yes, thank you so much, panelists. That was very, very enjoyable. And personally, I learned a lot as well. I think it was hopefully really valuable for the panelists to have that reflection time as well. And I hope everybody learned something from that too. So at any given point, like Brittany said in the chat, please feel free to raise your hand and you can feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions. But in the meantime, I'll go through the questions in the chat, and then panelists, you can handle the answers to this however you would like. If you have like a quick answer, you can all answer it, or just one or two of you. Don't feel like you all have to answer each question. So the first question from Diana: what's one thing you wish you brought from home that you didn't?
I guess for me, really quick, I wish I had allergy medicine. I did not really knew that I had some type of seasonal allergy. I still don't know what it's caused by. I get it randomly. It might just be moving from hot to cold temperatures, but bringing allergy meds, just like tiniest little bottle, lifesaver, because otherwise it's bad.
Thank you, Morgan.
Well, can I actually just add to Morgan's real quickly,
please.
just for additional background on that too? It's not that you can't get medication while you're abroad in some capacity, but it can certainly be a big stressor and a big hurdle to try to find the medication that you need, because the exact medication that you take in the US may not be the same brand or the same type. It could be a pill versus a liquid. The language barriers of what you're actually asking for can sometimes be troublesome too. But if you do have a known medication, certainly talk to your doctor in advance and make sure that you're getting a larger prescription, a longer for the entire time that you're abroad, so you're not dealing with that. But just wanted to add a little bit of background to that. So it's not probably that Morgan couldn't get allergy medication there, but a lot more difficult to just navigate that situation in a new place.
Very true. I want to skip, Sebastian, I'm going to come back to your question, but I would like to ask a couple of the identity questions first, just to make sure we have time, and then I'll come back to your, Sebastian, if that's okay. This is Erica's question. When people found out that you were from the US, did other people often ask about the political climate and want to discuss current events happening here?
I can answer that. To be honest, no, like people didn't really have much curiosity about it. Maybe that's just the kind of people that I was interacting with, but I mean, some people will say like one kind of off comment or something, but people didn't really want to have an in-depth conversation. I think it's because oftentimes they are more focused on like the political situation in that country. And for me, as an international relations major, I think it's pretty interesting to talk about that with them. So I was even like more like the curious one in the conversation. But yeah, I would say like actually no, it wasn't really a problem that came up for me.
Thank you. And to the other panelists, did anybody else have a different experience to that question? To that question?
Oh yeah, I did. It wasn't that dramatic, but people would be like, "Oh, you're from the US? God, I'm so sorry," or like something like that, where they'd be like, they understand what the situation looks like and they see it from a different perspective. So it looks bad, and it is bad, but it's like it's just difficult to kind of reply to if they aren't in the US and they sometimes don't know what's going on. But they're definitely aware, and it can come up as a conversation piece.
I think it's similar to Canada, but also I think in a lot of European countries too, when like people usually inquire about US political events, just to kind of see like where you stand in these views of different political events, and kind of like, and yeah, sorry, basically, it's just kind of like, it's very interesting because they kind of categorize you based off of stereotypes for like basically Trump supporters and like other like Democrats, and it's very like kind of a categorizing, and some people might treat you differently based off of your political views. So it just depends. I had a couple people ask me, but really it was very seldom. I was kind of surprised by that, because French people are very politically involved, and I didn't really experience that as much.
I think this is a really important question, and I just wanted to chime in because my advisees know this, and I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but I studied abroad in Madrid through USD when I was a student, and then I went back and lived there for a few years doing my master's degree. So I was in Madrid doing my master's degree during the last political election. So my friends and everyone I met was constantly asking me not only about politics, what maybe party I sided with, but they also were just very curious about our political system. So some of them would ask me like questions that honestly I didn't know the answer to, like how many seats were open in Congress, and what happens if this, you know, how the whole judicial like system and our voting process works. They asked me a ton about logistics and ballots. You may not get these kinds of very specific questions, but I didn't realize politics for me when I was studying abroad, or even before I had lived abroad. I avoided them because they made me uncomfortable, and I have polarized differing views than my entire family. So it was something that I tried not to talk about because it caused contention in my personal life. So when I moved abroad, everybody wanted to talk about it because they saw me as an insider that knew everything about politics. And I had avoided it my whole life. So one thing I had wished I had done, which I have done since then, but is I wish I was more informed about it, because people genuinely, my friends who are from all other different countries, Morocco, England, Ireland, I mean, all over the place, very different religious backgrounds, political views in their own countries, but also just culturally, things were so different where they were from. So they looked to me to kind of answer some of their cultural questions, and I wasn't very informed. So I wish I was, because they genuinely just wanted to sit down and talk about it. They just were curious. So I didn't have that kind of information. I felt like not the best representative telling them about it. So since then, I've done a lot of research, but for those of you going abroad in the spring, this will be post the election results of this year. So I think takeaway from me was to be informed and to maybe at least have an overview understanding and be prepared if you're asked those questions. I think in the US, we've become very polarized, and there is a lot of contention with the differing parties and people's political positions and preferences. When you're abroad, sometimes people are asking just because they're curious to listen and they just want to hear. So I think be prepared to not immediately be on the defense, and be prepared to have an open and honest conversation about maybe your personal views if you feel comfortable sharing them. Or if you're not comfortable saying, I honestly don't know, that's what I had to say a lot. I'm like, I honestly don't have an answer to that. I don't know what, 99th seat in this position. Like, I don't know what you're asking me right now because I'm not informed about it. So I think just for those of you going abroad in the spring, it is post-election. So just keep that in mind, that you may get a lot of political questions based on the results.
Thank you, Brittany. I think that was important. I was abroad before, during, and after the last election as well, and I had pretty much exactly the same experiences, and I was very surprised and taken aback by it and unprepared to answer a lot of questions. So I think that was really, really valid and important. Nicole asked a great question. What was a good strategy when trying to assimilate the culture of the country studied abroad? So essentially, what was a good strategy to immerse yourself or assimilate better into the culture of the country that you were in?
I think it helps to definitely chat with the people who understand the academics there. So like if there's like your professors or that kind of stuff, it helps to talk to them and about what it's like locally. So I would chat with my professors, and we had an activities coordinator who would coordinate activities. And so he'd like plan things for us all to do. And they were pretty quintessential English things. We'd go punting on the river, and we would go look at the Oxford University buildings and that kind of stuff. So definitely figure out what part of culture you're interested in and just learn about it. So I really liked architecture. I really liked art. I spent a lot of time in museums, exploring castles and that kind of thing. So figure out what that pinpoint is in the country that you're going to, and be open to learn about it. Use your resources, your professors, other students, and just be open to learning.
Yeah, I think another thing too is that, like, I know we're abroad and like we want to travel and see different countries every weekend. And I mean, I did too. I probably traveled and visited the country like every other week. But I also think it's important to set some time aside to actually learn about and stay in the country and explore like where you're staying, like not just what like during the week when you have classes and stuff, but also just take the weekend to like go to a park or a local coffee shop or something like that.
I think the biggest thing for me, at least especially being in France, you have to like well, not have to, but you should learn as much French as you can before you go, because most French people take pride in their language and their culture. And in order to know the insights of their culture, you have to know the language. Something, for example, like I picked up a bunch of really interesting, just kind of like expressions and words while I was there, like different kind of slangs and things. So I think it's just important to learn as much as you can, try to learn as many cultural things, like saying hello when you enter a store, like learning just like the cultural basics and as much of the language as you can is really going to help. And I think too, like, find friends or use your host family too, to like ask them to correct your French or your Spanish or your Czech whenever they can. And not that it has to be all the time, but, just asking for help with language improvement if that's something that you want to do.
Just quickly to add on, I think trying to make friends with people the same age as us, but in that country. So like for me, it would be Spanish people when I was in Madrid. But also just like there's lots of European students who do like Erasmus, which is like the European exchange for like different countries within Europe. And so like they'll be in that city as well. And so I think trying to meet people like the same age as us, you can really like see the differences between the cultures, and then you have international friends in that city. So that's always fun.
Thank you all. Fabulous tips. Loving this. I'm going to come back to Sebastian's first question. How were you able to manage schoolwork and visiting other countries and just traveling in general while you were abroad? And how did you plan ahead for visiting other countries?
So I was lucky where in Prague, you only had 3-hour classes, so you only met once a week. So I scheduled it in a way where I only had classes 3 days a week. So I spent the rest of the 4 days traveling. So definitely time management. So learn how to schedule your classes. And I definitely recommend doing and finishing your homework before you set off to travel, because once you travel to a different country, you're going to be exhausted by trying to like see all these different go and see all these different places. So you're not going to have time to actually sit down and do homework, no matter no matter what you tell yourself. I think I forget what the second half of the question, but like to prepare, I definitely would coordinate with other people who have similar travel plans to you, so you could hop on their trip and that you can just split costs, and definitely look at flight plans and hotels and areas and areas you want to see and hit whenever to utilize your time.
And I would just like to add to that in terms of kind of answering that question that, for those of you who are going abroad next semester, spring 2021, we don't yet know what that's going to look like in regards to traveling and leaving your host country. Right now, Europe is not very open. So January is still a few months away. So we just don't yet know what that's going to look like. So it's just an important consideration. But if any other panelists would like to answer that question, feel free. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on to the next question. I will move on. Was there a form of meal plan provided at the school you attended? And if not, what did you have?
I didn't have a meal plan, but there are a lot of restaurants available around in the surrounding areas, and they are relatively cheap. I think the most I probably spent on the meal is like a really, really nice meal is probably $15, but typically meals would range between 8 to 10, and that's like with like a meal and a drink. So definitely very affordable. Another option is there are a lot of grocery stores. And in Prague, that you are set in an apartment. So they do come with kitchen facility, so you can learn how to cook yourself.
I actually had a really good setup. My host mom, she used to own a restaurant, so the cooking was great. I didn't I did have a meal plan, but it was with my host mom. So she would provide breakfast. I would be responsible for lunch, and she would provide dinner, I think 5 or 6 days a week. And then I'd be responsible for dinner at 1 day a week. But she actually would go visit my host mom was like 60, her mom was like 100. So she would go take care of her mom on the weekends. And so I think she always had food for us for the whole weekend. So we actually didn't pay for dinner, but that's like an exception. But I think one of the best things to do is if you're like, for example, maybe traveling in a different country or just like need a quick bite to eat, is going to like a boulangerie is awesome. Like just going to get a little pastry, get a little drink. Usually there's like meal deals too. You can get like a sandwich, dessert, and drink for like 8 to 10 euros, which isn't bad. But if you wanted something smaller too, you can get a slice of quiche, a tart, pain au chocolat for like a couple euros, which is super, super easy to do. And I think those are mostly what I lived off of, is like those little like small like pasta shops, bakeries, in France.
I had like a similar, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Faiza, no problem at all.
I had a similar experience to Kirsten where we didn't have a meal plan, but we would take like a quick little bus ride or a quick little walk to this place. It was like a little sandwich cafe, and it was £4 for a big sandwich that I could essentially eat for lunch and dinner. So it was super helpful, and food in Europe, I feel like it's a little less expensive than in the US. So it's much more doable to like spend, and you just have to create a budget beforehand. I kind of felt like it was helpful to have a budget and to go with the cheap but filling option. Just be prepared to kind of create your own food plan, even if there isn't an official one.
Thank you so much. We did have a couple other questions in the chat, but unfortunately we are out of time at this stage. But I did just want to point out that we are going to be following up with all attendees with some resources. We do have resources on our website that we are currently updating as we speak, and some USD campus resources as well. And we're going to email you some follow-up activity resources and add those to the document section of your study abroad portal if you are an applicant for spring 2021. So there will be follow-up coming. Feel free to reach out to any of us with any further questions, of course. And I would just like to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists today. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope you all did as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And please follow us on Instagram if you're not already, at USD Study Abroad. And thank you again.
Yeah, and I think we're all, the advisors at least, I don't know about our panelists, we're willing to hang out for a few more minutes. I know classes don't necessarily start till 2:30, so if you had pressing questions, feel free to hang out. At least the advisors will be here, if not our panelists. They may have to go. So we're willing to kind of chat with you on a smaller scale if you'd like. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to all of our panelists and everyone for being here. We hope you appreciate it and enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to add to that, the International Center, we are a safe space. We want to engage in identity and culture and help you navigate all of that as you prepare to go abroad. We have open door policies for you to come in and talk with us. We're not experts, but we certainly can help connect you to some amazing resources. Of course, on the last slide, we had some of those listed there for you, and we'll follow up with that email that Chelsea mentioned. But this is very complex. Identities, you have an intersectionality of different sorts of identities, and it's going to all look different in a culture that you may or may not have been to before. So please continue to engage in these this preparation and going abroad, and know that we're here for you. Thank you.